Welcome into another edition of the Soccer Down Here 1v1. My name's Jason Longshore, and this week's announcement that Atlanta United will be an investor in Aberdeen FC in Scotland, I think necessitated a special 1v1. Derek Rae, broadcaster that you know from his work with Fox, you know from his work with World Cups, you know from his work with the Bundesliga, with the NFL Thursday Game of the Week on Amazon Prime. Derek has done it all in the industry, and Derek is also a native of Aberdeen. Before we get to Derek, a little bit more about the deal itself for those of you who missed it. AMB S&E, AMB Sports and Entertainment, that's the parent company of Atlanta United. They announced the financial investment in Aberdeen FC. It's £2 million, $2.5 million in American dollars. It's part of a £5 million package led by software entrepreneur Dave Cormack. He's a native of Aberdeen, but he's a resident of Atlanta, an Atlanta United season ticket holder. He will become Aberdeen's new chairman after its annual general meeting on December 16th. That stake in Aberdeen from AMB SE, it's less than 10% of the club, no operational involvement, no day-to-day oversight. Darren Eales, Atlanta United's president, will join Aberdeen's board of directors as part of the deal. One of the things that has stuck with me as this deal has been talked about was a story Darren told Doug Robertson of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution about when they were in Scotland doing due diligence. There was a sign that he saw at Pittodrie, the stadium that Aberdeen FC has played at since 1903. Aberdeen, proud club that won 2 European trophies in 1983. The manager of Real Madrid, who Aberdeen defeated in the European Cup Winners' Cup in 1983. Di Stefano is an absolute legend in the game, one of the greatest players ever born in Argentina, one of the greatest players to ever feature for Real Madrid. He was the manager of Real Madrid at this time. He said, and this is on a sign at the stadium, Aberdeen FC have what money can't buy: a soul, a team spirit built in family tradition. There's so many links between Atlanta and Aberdeen and Atlanta United and Aberdeen FC that this kind of move really makes a lot of sense for both sides. Let's hear from Darren Eales at the press conference introducing this investment.
So why Aberdeen and why have a global partnership, this sort of strategic partnership? I think firstly, Dave alluded to it earlier, we're in a global game here with the world of football. And so we feel there's some real synergies that we can have, both commercially and technically, from having a partner club here in Scotland. From an economies of scale, everything from scouting through to data analytics, sports science, youth development. There's many possibilities for us to share those resources for win-wins for both Aberdeen and Atlanta United. So we're really excited over the next 90 days to be exploring and really digging deeper into those sort of benefits there could be for both clubs. Now, why Aberdeen? I mean, there's a number of factors for that. Firstly, I mean, this is a incredibly well-run club, and that was important to us because we didn't want to have the operational burden. This is not something where we're looking to come and take over the club. This is very much a well-run club, and it's credit to what Stuart's done and Duncan in terms of positioning this club where it is. 6 consecutive seasons of qualifying for Europe. Cormack Park and what's been done here with the training ground shows that there's ambition here, and it's a well-run club. So that was really important to us. Secondly, we're really focused on the core values we have at Atlanta United. And Arthur Blank has that across all of his businesses. And one of the most important is giving back to others. So what's been done here in Aberdeen in terms of the community trust really is absolutely fantastic. From being the UEFA Grassroots Club of the Year this year, earlier decided by UEFA, through to what you did with the Football Memories Programme and the Alzheimer's. It really is impressive what's done in the community. And that was something that was really important to us as we looked for a partner club strategically that we could work with. So that was something that, that really struck us as we were here. And then ultimately it's down to personal relationships. And Dave's someone that I've got to know over the past 3 years in Atlanta. As he mentioned, myself, members of our club have come here and visited. And what we've seen here is what we felt was a real connection in terms of culture around the club, what's happening here, that we could absolutely provide some real sort of win-win synergies between us. So, we're really excited. We can't wait to get started on the partnership. Excited about what the future brings.
And now, without further ado, let's hear from Derek Rae and get his take on this partnership and the hopes that I think both of us share, and how big it can be for Atlanta United and how big it can be for Aberdeen FC, and maybe show clubs on both sides of the Atlantic a new way of working together in a very genuine way forward. So, I thought this would be perfect, Derek, to catch up with you to pick your brain about this Atlanta-Aberdeen relationship. A lot of Atlanta United fans are excited, and I've been pleasantly surprised at the reaction from Aberdeen supporters about this relationship.
Well, first of all, Jason, thanks for having me on. Yes, I've been pleasantly surprised too. I think Aberdeen fans are quite happy with the idea of having a link. And I think in this case, a link with a club that is on the up and up in Atlanta United. Now, the man who's at the centre of it all from the Aberdeen point of view is Dave Cormack, who's the newly installed chairman. And he's been very active in Atlanta soccer, football circles for a long time. Dave Cormack, who is an Aberdonian. But I was in his office about a year and a half ago when he had come back to Aberdeen with a specific task in mind for the club when he'd been appointed to the board. And it was very clear that his ideas did extend to Atlanta. He saw some synergy there. And I think Aberdeen fans like the idea of the association with Atlanta. I think they're very happy with John Gallagher and how that has gone, the loan. And probably it's a portent of more things like that to come.
Yeah, I would expect to see that. And both sides at the press conference this week talked about the next 90 days. They'll kind of figure out some of those next steps. But for Atlanta fans who are new maybe to this, and especially new to this kind of relationship, give us a little bit of an overview on where Aberdeen is at the moment, where they kind of stand in the world of Scotland.
Well, I think it's possible to argue that Aberdeen are the third force in Scottish football and have been for a good number of years. They probably vie with Heart of Midlothian and Hibernian, the two Edinburgh clubs, for that title. Obviously, Celtic and Rangers are bigger clubs in terms of their fan bases, in terms of their attendances. But, if you go back to the 1980s, and I was born in the late 1960s and grew up in Aberdeen following the Dons in the early 70s, starting from the early 70s. But in the 80s, Aberdeen were not only the first force in Scottish football, you could argue for a spell that they were actually the best team in all of Europe. And I know that many fans in Atlanta will think, goodness, really? Best team in all of Europe? But it was a different era. We were not in the era then of big money transfers, of players coming in from other countries. Aberdeen won the Cup Winners' Cup in 1983. And the manager at the time was a fellow by the name of Alex Ferguson. I wonder whatever happened to him.
I think things went pretty well for him.
Yeah, they did. But he would be the first to say that Aberdeen was really where it all began. He had been managing other clubs prior to that, St Mirren immediately before Aberdeen. But he took Aberdeen just to a higher level. And winning the Cup Winners' Cup in 1983, that was one of the three big European trophies then. Defeated Bayern in the quarter-final. I was there that night when they won 3-2 at Pittodrie. We'll never forget it. And then Real Madrid, no less, in the final itself in the Swedish city of Gothenburg in 1983. And then after that, they won the European Super Cup, which actually took place a few months later. One of the quirks of the scheduling back in those days. They beat Hamburg, who were the European Cup winners in 1983 in that Super Cup. So, that was the high point. Obviously, it was going to be very difficult to sustain that. But under Ferguson, they won 3 league titles. And things after that have been sort of up and down. There have been spells when Aberdeen have drifted all the way down to the lower reaches of the Scottish top division table. But a lot of stability in recent years under Derek McInnes, winning the League Cup 2013, 2014. And at the moment, as I said, third force in Scottish football, with an average attendance of between 12 and 15,000. Remember, it's not a huge metro area like Atlanta. It's distinct from the rest of Scotland in terms of the culture, the accent. It's the oil capital of Europe, at least that's the moniker that's been given to Aberdeen. And many of the people who live in the Granite City, as we call it, are employed in the oil industry or oil-related services. And as I say, that's where the club is, about to move into a new stadium, recently opened a new training ground, and exciting times ahead.
It's been interesting digging into this, into the links between Atlanta and Aberdeen. You know, Dave Cormack, his time being an Atlanta resident, being involved in the Atlanta Silverbacks for a short period of time. You had Willie McIntosh, who played for the Atlanta Chiefs in 1968 when they won the NASL title. He had come from Aberdeen, had a couple other stops in his career. And when you go back further, what made me think of this was you mentioning the Granite City of Aberdeen. When Atlanta soccer really got started back in the 1910s and 1920s, there was a group in Atlanta that was predominantly English that was starting to get games going and trying to start a league. But there was a group in DeKalb County just to the east that worked in the quarries with granite that was predominantly from Aberdeen. And those were some of the original people who started playing soccer in the metro Atlanta area back in the 1910s and 20s. The links here are wild when you really get down to it.
That's fascinating what you just told me, Jason. I didn't actually know that. I'm not totally surprised because I remember in my early days here in the USA, we're going back to the early 1990s, I met a gentleman called Sam Folds, who was the historian for US soccer. And he was very intrigued that I came from Aberdeen because he did tell me that quarrying was part of this, that there were many who came from Scotland in the quarrying industry who ended up being right at the forefront of the initial growth of the game of soccer. And people often think that soccer is a recent import here in the USA. It's not at all. It has a very rich history going all the way back to the middle part of the 19th century. And I actually come from quarrying stock, if you like, as well. One of my ancestors was a quarrier in Aberdeen. So the subject is quite dear to my heart. And Aberdeen really was a very important place when it came to the quarrying industry. And if anybody ever goes to Aberdeen, they'll see that virtually all the houses, certainly the older houses, are made of granite. And on a depressing rainy day, and unfortunately we get more than our fair share of depressing rainy days, they don't necessarily look great, but on a sunny day, they absolutely sparkle. And if you take a walk up Queen's Road or Rubislaw Terrace or some of these streets, Rubislaw Den, then you really see the granite in all its glory. So it is interesting that it's sort of come full circle on that front.
Definitely. And one of the things that Darren Eales mentioned that really stuck with me when you look at this relationship, Aberdeen in recent years financially has really, it feels like, turned the corner. You have the investment in the training facility, you have the talk about the new stadium, but this is a team that's really increased its revenues in recent years. And Darren mentioned part of the attraction to this relationship was how well run of a club Aberdeen is.
Yeah, I think that's very important. And things have changed for Aberdeen because if we were to go back in time 20 years, let's say, that was a dangerous period, I think, for many clubs in Scotland, because what had happened was they had taken note of things in England with regard to finance, and the money was just going through the roof in terms of players' wages, in terms of transfer fees. It was the era of Bosman, of free agency, if you like. And all of a sudden, teams in Scotland thought they had to copy what was happening south of the border without the same TV revenue coming in. And it meant that teams went heavily into debt, and Aberdeen were no exception around that time. But I think after that dangerous period, as I termed it, the teams started to think differently and said, we can't do this anymore. And obviously the financial crisis of the latter part of that decade really reinforced that, if anybody had any doubt about it at all. And since then, we have seen teams living within their means for the most part, certainly provincial clubs like Aberdeen, who recognise that, yes, they are in a sense, lucky because they have one area of Scotland to themselves. There's no real competition in the Aberdeen area. It's not like the west of Scotland where there are so many clubs competing with each other. But on the other hand, 12 to 15,000 really has always been, certainly in recent times, the attendance. That is your public. Even when they were, as I said, the best club side in Europe, they were getting crowds of that range. So I think the recognition was there, and under Duncan Fraser, who was the chief executive, Stuart Milne, the chairman, the outgoing chairman, I think they had to, tighten belts and, as I said, live within their means. And since Derek McInnes became manager, there's been stability on the pitch as well. As I said, they've been consistently the third force in Scottish football. They have given Celtic a run for their money in the league and also in the Scottish Cup and also the League Cup going back over the last 5 or 6 years. So, yeah, I think Darren Eales is right. Stability is at the forefront of what Aberdeen and their modern guys are all about.
Two other things that, as I've been able to learn more about Aberdeen here in recent days, that have jumped out to me as attractive propositions from the Atlanta side of this partnership are Aberdeen's commitment long-term to developing talent and their academy and bringing young players through, but also their great work in the community and building community. And those are things that, from an Atlanta United perspective, with just the youth of the club, just only a few years old, has to be really attractive for Atlanta's front office and leadership to learn from.
Undoubtedly. That's something that Aberdeen take very seriously. As I said in the previous answer, the northeast of Scotland is kind of its own area. There's an independent culture, an independent streak. And it's important for Aberdeen to get the best players from the area to be part of the club. Now, one good example of that would have been Ryan Fraser a few years ago, obviously a star nowadays in the Premier League in England with Bournemouth and being linked with a number of top clubs. But he began his journey at Aberdeen and came through the ranks there. Didn't actually play for the first team very many times at all. He was off to Bournemouth, who were then in the third tier. He thought that was a good move, and guess what? He was right, although a few people doubted that at the time. But that's the sort of the role model for what you can find in Aberdeen. You sometimes have to dig very deep to do that. But I think that makes a lot of sense, because Atlanta United, obviously, from the other side of it, what you have in Atlanta is you have the crowds, you have the interest, you have this new club, you have a title, you have a manager who's very well known around the world, and the same applied to the previous coach. What Aberdeen has is something that's a bit more rooted in the community. It's smaller scale in terms of crowds, but something pretty big has happened there. And admittedly, it was, a long time ago now, more than 3 decades ago, going back to that Cup Winners' Cup triumph. But I think the message that was sent by Atlanta United was a good, effective one. Southern swagger together with Scottish legends, so that you have the confidence of a new team in Atlanta, the confidence that comes with having won something. And then you have the legendary aspect of what Aberdeen have achieved, a football country to the very core. It's the one thing, if you ever go to Aberdeen, you'll see that a lot of the talk revolves around the Dons. And it doesn't matter if they're in third place or in 6th or 7th place in the table. The interest is there, and people gravitate to Pittodrie, the stadium that has been used by Aberdeen since 1903, and I think will continue to do so until such time as the new stadium opens.
And we know the new stadium is part of this relationship in terms of what Atlanta United can provide to Aberdeen, just that experience of, different scale, but still opening a new venue. And fan experience and match day experience is something that's come up a lot. And thanks to you, I connected with the Here We Go podcast and talked about this from a little bit. And it's a different conversation. I think there's definitely maybe a little bit of trepidation on the Aberdeen side about the Americanization of the match day experience or the fan experience. But on the MLS side, it's been so critical commercially to have that fan experience be correct. How do you think you find the common ground between the tradition and the newness of it all?
I think it's a learning experience for both. I think that if an American fan were to make his or her way to Pittodrie, they would think that it perhaps seems a bit bare bones in comparison with what they're accustomed to at an Atlanta United game, for example. Now, in Aberdeen, people go to the game, they watch the game, and then they rush home. There's not a lot of, arriving hours beforehand, and there's certainly no tradition of hanging around afterwards. It's a matter of, come on, let's get out of the cold. And again, that is, one of the reasons for that. The climate is very different. Pittodrie Stadium is right on the North Sea, and the wind can come whipping in. You're not going there to sort of stand around and pass the time of day. You're going there to watch a football match. But having said that, and I've certainly argued this for a while, you can learn from other experiences. I'm always telling people in Scotland, go to Germany, where I spend a lot of my time, and have a look at how things are done there. Again, subtly different. Go to MLS and you'll see a very different fan experience, which is in keeping with, I think, what the public want here in the United States. And that can only help. You can look at other examples and you can learn from them. And perhaps the same will apply when Atlanta United and their officials have a look at what happens in Aberdeen. They'll think, okay, there are one or two things here that we quite like that can make the thing a bit more organic. But I think it's all about the strength in the difference. And I think that's one of the factors here, one of the things that has attracted Aberdeen and Atlanta United. And it has taken, I think, Dave Cormack to bring the two together and make each party realise that there can be a lot for each other to learn commercially and in football terms.
Yeah, I think you have two people leading this relationship who will have a pretty good understanding of both sides of it, in Dave Cormack and Darren Eales, with their shared experiences here in Atlanta, but also their experiences of the game that they grew up knowing and what that match day experience looks like. I think they can navigate that pretty well, and hopefully both sides benefit from those shared experiences.
I think so. And listening to Aberdeen fans in the last few days, I think they're rather attracted by the idea of Aberdeen and Atlanta being partners. And, that could extend to more players in both directions. We spoke about John Gallagher earlier. There could be other such examples. And it could well be that a young Aberdeen player goes to Atlanta to get experience, whether that's with the first team or with the reserve team or just to imbibe the atmosphere and a different culture. I think that's very important on both sides. I think it benefits a young soccer player, a young footballer, to be in a different environment, to be outside his comfort zone and take in things from that. So I think the partnership can be multifold. I hope it also extends to fans, because it's something I've been saying for a while. I think that if you do have a partner team somewhere, I think it helps greatly. I've even seen Atlanta fans on social media in the last few days saying, oh, okay, I think I have to look out for Aberdeen now. And perhaps even that's a good excuse to go to a game, because I know that fans are always looking for trips. Obviously, from the States, you have to really commit to it. You have to really want to go on a trip. But if you are heading to the United Kingdom, then it's not that difficult to get to Aberdeen, given the small scale in comparison with the United States. So I hope many will take advantage of that. And I certainly think, having spoken to a few Aberdeen fans, that Atlanta United will now be their MLS team. Many have said to me, I didn't really have an MLS team I looked out for. Well, now that's a no-brainer. And, let's go to Atlanta and try to watch a game if we can as soon as possible.
It feels like a good time for that, too, because the perception of MLS is really starting to change. Have you noticed that from Aberdeen fans or Scottish fans as a whole, of just how they look at the league now?
Yes, it definitely is taken more seriously than it was. And Jason, I go all the way back to the very first day of MLS. I was one of the commentators that first year. And back then, the league wasn't taken quite as seriously. I mean, to be fair, it was a struggle just to get it up and running. And then a few years in, there were financial problems and many were doubting whether it would continue. But it weathered that early storm. And it really struck me when I was back working in the UK between 2010 and 2017, that on a Sunday night UK time, obviously Sunday afternoon here in the United States, MLS would have a TV slot to itself. Now, we're not talking about huge ratings or anything, but it was on. And, imagine somebody in the UK in the middle of winter. It's pretty dark. There are not a lot of things to do on a Sunday night, but you have a game to watch, or games, plural, to watch. And that occurred with MLS. And I started to notice that was more part of the conversation amongst fans, that, I could watch an MLS game. Some of it has to do with betting in the UK because, sure, as you know, people like to bet on an event. And so there you go. There's an event on. It's on TV. It was on Sky TV at the time. So let's watch it. And in the cases of some people, let's make a bet. So I think it has caught the attention more in recent years. Part of that, too, could be because players with whom fans in Scotland and in England are familiar have been there, the likes of David Beckham and Robbie Keane and Frank Lampard, go down the list. And so I think every little thing helps. I think you look for a connection if you can. Obviously, Gary Mackay-Steven, recently an Aberdeen player, now playing for NYCFC in MLS. These are connections that can be made that are important. So I think it's come a long way. Obviously, still has hills to climb, MLS, in every sense. But I think now people watch it with a keener eye, certainly than they would have done in the early days when it really was pretty invisible outside the USA.
One other big connection here, and somebody that I've had a chance to talk to since this was announced and is very excited about it, obviously, is Stephen Glass, Atlanta United 2's manager, who is a bit of a legend in Aberdeen.
He certainly is. And I had a chat with Stephen must have been about a year and a half, 2 years ago, when I had just come back to the USA and Stephen was looking at a few options. And then suddenly he told me a few weeks later, I'm heading for Atlanta United. So, Stephen is of, that generation where, Aberdeen fans remember what he did as a player. And I think most people were probably unaware that he was working for Atlanta United a week or so ago, but they're very aware of that fact now. And it comes back to what we said earlier. It is a connection. And, he was a very classy player, Stephen, and not surprised that he's in the coaching world and prospering on that front too. So when you think about it, and I always think about it this way, the world of soccer, the world of football seems to be this huge world, but it's actually quite a small world when it comes down to it. There is always a connection somewhere. You spoke earlier about, the Atlanta area and some of the early pioneers having come from Aberdeen. You can find connections wherever you look. And I think now this connection will be ever more solidified with the partnership between Aberdeen and Atlanta United.
Yeah, I think ultimately the feeling that I have coming out of this, with all of the shared connections, all of the potential benefits for both sides, is this feels like a genuine partnership, not a marketing exercise, not a thing to sell jerseys or put badges on websites. It feels like a genuine partnership where both sides can really gain from it.
I think so. And I think what is important in all of this is the financial component. Now, we're not talking about a lot of money by American sports standards in terms of the investment, the financial investment that the Atlanta Group have made in Aberdeen. But I think it's appreciated, and I think it probably just makes Aberdeen fans think that this is different than just a sort of a in-name partnership. Yeah, we're going to work with this team and we'll see what happens. The financial commitment is there. And it's more than symbolic, I think. And as I say, Scottish football is not awash with cash. You have to be resourceful to work in Scottish football. And that's what we were talking about earlier in terms of finding local players, in terms of trying to get every advantage you can. And this can probably help Aberdeen have a bit of an advantage, and it, by the sound of it, can help Atlanta United have a bit of an advantage in terms of being in the European market, being able to help out there, but also being able to help themselves that way too, with on-the-ground knowledge. And I think we will see more of that. I'm positive we will see players heading in both directions.
Feels like potentially a groundbreaking partnership, and I'm sure there will be plenty of things that will come out of this over time, and we'll have to check in again, and maybe in 6 months, a year, and kind of where things stand between Atlanta and Aberdeen. But Derek, thanks for all the background. Thank you so much for the time. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Jason. Thank you.
Excited about what the future can hold for this relationship between Atlanta United and Aberdeen FC. Thanks again to Derek Rae for his time and giving us a lot of great background on why this partnership makes a lot of sense and why I feel like it's really going to be beneficial on both sides. Any kind of partnership you're looking to create, you want it to be a win-win. This has all the makings of that. Make sure you're following Derek on social media, RAECOMM, Raycom on Twitter. Absolutely great follow to keep up with all the amazing work that Derek does, and also some nuggets on Aberdeen and what's going on with the Dons. And I'm sure that's something Atlanta United fans are now going to want to keep up with their new team to follow in Scotland. Thanks again for listening. We will be back with more 1v1s very soon. Follow us on social media at Soccer Down Here and subscribe in all of your favorite podcatchers to all the content that we're putting out on the SDH network. Thanks, everybody.